The Oglers. I loved art as a child, oftentimes in excess of myself. I can't remember a time when the shores of my subconscious were not littered with the phantasms of conceptual paintings by Rothko or Pollock. Not that such a time did not exist, but rather it was before time relative to this. There was always this one that I remember most as a child seeing. It was The Deep, a profoundly hollow painting by Pollock. It's the painting of a crack, a void, an emptiness that I believe he felt and was always trying to fill. When I think back on my life, I think about it in regards to this same void. We each can think of life as a painting, and we are working on ours. The deep is just a metaphor or an archetype for the countlessly infinite masterpieces that exist within the nature that is man. Then there is something else, a different archetype, that of the coming into being and being itself, the wholeness you feel when you are loved if you are loved. And some of us, more than others, only know this love and not the cruel master that is emotional pain. There is a sculpture that always reminds me of this being, Merritt Oppenheim's Luncheon in Fur. It's a teacup on a saucer, and the porcelain is lined with fur. It's very surreal to think of such a simple idea that transfixes the mind and contorts a simple object into a dream. To abstract something into an idea from what it was to what it now has become in the mind of the viewer is such an amazing feat. In a sense, we lose ourselves to the madness of time and of life itself, and even that of the dream. Who am I? What is my purpose? These are questions that one spends a lifetime answering and yet never knows. But we must ask ourselves, if is no answer at the door to our subconscious, then why are we knocking? Perhaps a little boy dressed in a t-shirt and jeans will answer one winter day in the cold of the night. I ask myself, "What is your name, boy?" And he smiles. I know his name. We've spoken many times, but I've been too stubborn to answer him. We look inwards in the journey of life and love, and sometimes love does not come so willingly. We do this so as to see, who am I? It plagues the mind, that subtle difference in understanding the thought of what, and not whom, of how, and not when and where, and not why. The center stone in the circle of identity is formulated on principles of cryptographic, metacognitive, ideological idioms of pure thought, and we are subject to each of these in their infinite complexity and recursive continuity. It is only once one disposes of all notions of language propagation that they can fully utter the void akin to the deep and step into the chasm of the id to find the archetype of coming into being and being itself. This is hidden in a hole in a well that never runs dry and always cries but never tells why. Essentially, there is no source to this well. It is, was, and always will be. The question, who am I, can be found here if one sits parallel to the surface of the firmament of consciousness. For the time that they have to live and to die, but as no one has such time in their pocket on a clock that is relative to its position in time and space, then no one will ever know the answer to that question. They will only walk at an infinitely slower pace. The thing I imagine you'll find there in the deep is a widget, a thingamabob, a doodad, so interesting and important, essential to what it is, but nobody knows the point of it except I. You will pick it up and you have a choice, and another choice. Do I replace it with another, or do I let it have a voice? And all is well, much the same, but in the end, don't pretend you didn't have this choice, for then you made the choice of shame. If you replace the widget, then you have committed the oldest sin. Inception, you become the replacement widget upon its placement, and conception within the deep. Do not play with these notions, for these notions play in your sleep. But if you play with these notions, you must choose consciously what it is you believe. Mankind is at the center of my well. They ask a question. What could happen to us in the depth of your anger? And I see a deep blue, much like Picasso's Blue Period, and I see the horrors of humanity, the Epic of Night by Elie Wiesel, survivor of that place called Auschwitz. And I say to myself now, out of the deep and into the dark, who are you to tell me that I am not hell, and there in the pit in Auschwitz are the bodies of a few million poor unfortunate souls burning alive, until you reach emptiness and you have a room where a man stands. Call him God, I call him the scientist. He wears a white lab coat in his white room. The windows are tinted so as to only see into the room and not out, but something is observing from the other side. We just can't see what or whom. And there is a child, the same child in a t-shirt and jeans, bare feet, no shoes or socks, and he has before him a child's easel, a blank slate made of thin, crinkly, cheap drawing paper, and he's holding a single extra large broken red crayon. He knows that he's being watched and studied. This is a test. It's always a test. So he begins to self-consciously draw scribbles, hoping that they are studying what he is drawing. But what he doesn't know is that the purpose of the test is not about the drawing, but rather the subconscious behaviors he exhibits whilst he draws, that he is unaware of. The scientist is an actor, and everything in the room is a prop. The child grows anxious and begins to bang on the one-way mirrors because he knows he's being watched. Nobody has to tell him. Who is behind there? He screams in frustration. What is happening? He yells. But the silence is sterile as he is restrained by the scientist. As he continues to pound and rip at the scientist's flesh, he bites and kicks and screams and breaks his own skin along with that of the scientist, and the room fills with blood slowly pooling out, but the observer behind the one-way mirror does not give any notion or response. There is no tapping at the glass, only gloss and slick, thick, wet, pooling blood. I imagine if we saw the observer's face, we would see two things: a sight so horrifying that it would make that bloody room feel warm and inviting, and or an empty face like Rene Magritte's The Son of Man, a self-portrait of Rene with an apple obscuring his face. In fact, we might see many such imaginary and unresolved creatures, such as a man made of M.C. Escher's Infinite Staircase. I call him Eisel, a combination of Eli and Wiesel. He too has no face, but his body goes into itself and out of itself in ways that cannot be traced. You would ask yourself if you saw them, what are these creatures? They are not John. They are something else that lurks in the depths of his environment, both social and obscure, abstract, and purely non-linguistic. They are what I call oglers, for they ogle with their mind's eye, and they boggle one's sight. They speak in tongues of fire and wind, water and earth, a purely elemental and natural spoken language, but it has an unnatural accent, like the industrial smog of a city. What they say is iterated confusingly, but doesn't really come to much except the other side of the void and the firmament of my subconscious mind, where I find them once again conscious.